the guest speaker session, I will introduce Dr. Michael Fullan. Now, Dr. Michael Fullan, I came across him in 1999 when I was doing school improvement planning, and the best of the school improvement planning researches were by Michael Fullan and Andy Hargreaves. And I just got into it as I reached University of Strathclyde and entered the library of University of Strathclyde. I was in the leadership section because school improvement planning, change management, and all these things, I got into it from 1999 onwards. And Michael Fullan, I found him an authority where it comes to leading change, leading innovations, and leading the classrooms. So right now he is into innovative pedagogy for deep learning, and that is what we had requested. And in part of his conversation, he's covered that. So the formal introduction to Michael Fullan. Michael Fullan is the Global Leadership Director, New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. Deep learning, as described by NPDL, is mobilized by 4 elements that contribute to form the new pedagogies. They are learning partnerships, learning environments, pedagogical practices, and leveraging digital recognized as a worldwide authority on educational reform. He advises policymakers and local leaders in helping to achieve the moral purpose of all children learning. I read a book, the moral imperatives for change. Then Michael Fullan received the Order of Canada in December 2012. He holds honorary doctorate from several universities around the world. Fullan is a prolific, award-winning author whose books have been published in many languages. His book, Leading in a Culture of the Change, received the 2002 Book of the Year Award by Learning Forward Breakthrough. He won the 2006 Book of the Year Award from the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education and Turnaround Leadership in Higher Education. Change Wars was named 2009 Book of the Year by Learning Forward and Professional Capital with Andy Hargreaves. So we have a world-renowned educational leader, and rural other education fields honored to have his keynote speech for today. So over to the admin, please. Can we have Michael Fullan's session now starting?
Partnership, whether they're students or on the left bottom left corner, what I know in a 30-minute span, and give you access to this other information that I'm talking about. Okay, let's get started on what we know. What I'll present with you is a short version of the recent knowledge that we've developed prior to the COVID, but during and now after almost. You'll see our website on the bottom left corner, the deep learning one. Do go there. You'll see a lot more material. There's a YouTube channel with some of this in action. So let's see how we can portray where we are in system change. As I said, there are a lot of systems now that are, for the first time in most of our first 5 years in doing this, we got requests from individual schools, from school districts or municipalities, but now it's the system level, the political level that's also engaged. So sorting that out is both a problem, I guess I'll say, as well as an opportunity. So let's frame it. This slide you'll see is the first 3 parts of the slide say we're in trouble. That traditional schooling was already boring prior to COVID, and COVID exposed many ways in which that was the case, and even more so. So I'll tackle that in a few moments, what it is and what to do about it. That inequity is widening, that is the gap between those that are doing well and those not doing well in society, as well as in schools, is a problem. It is, if anything, it's worsening, even though more money is being put into it. Third, the world is troubled. There are really two big dimensions of this. They feed on each other. One is the physical dimension of climate change and all the negative ramifications of that. The other is the social dimension, which we can capture with the concept social trust, where the perception that people have of the degree of social trust as they think of other groups in society has plummeted from somewhere around 65% to 30% in the last 40 years, and still is probably edging down. So social trust is a big problem. The solution in education for us is deep learning, which we think addresses all three of those. It makes learning exciting. You'll see. It deals explicitly with a better chance of reducing the inequity gap, and it certainly does something about relationships. And our feature that's coming out of this from young people: I want to learn and I want to contribute to the world. This is the interface with the troubled world that we can perhaps hope for. So as we get into leading up to what we can do and what is the context, you'll see this referred to in 2020. This was really what we're finding out really before COVID had hit. And this is, and I won't say every item, there's 5 or 6 items on a given slide. I just want to take 2 of these, the first and the fifth, just to illustrate it. Here it is. One is that one reason that the system isn't working is there's a really massive failure. You'll see in a moment, more than the majority are failings of students failing to see the sense of purpose for themselves in relation to most education. We jump to number 5, failure to build relationships and belongingness, crucial for well-being, crucial for learning, crucial for anything working. And so this is a fundamental problem. Put another way, our colleague at Harvard, Jal Mehta, did a study of deeper learning, he called it. He and his team went to schools in the US, secondary schools, that were supposed to be learning deep learning. They had that reputation for themselves. Jal's team went out, and they didn't find much. They spent a lot of time looking. They found a little bit in this or that classroom, some of it in the after hours classes, the theater and clubs and so forth, but not in the pedagogical center of the schooling. And the way they portrayed it, and I love their choice of words here, the yawning gap, that's a good way of describing boredom, but the yawning gap, they said the way schools are organized, and this is the thing we have to change in deep learning, we are changing the way schools are organized. And as they said, the way that schools are organized, I'll pick out a couple of these, that the opportunity to do work that has purpose, personal purpose and meaning, is very limited. Fundamental problem. Strong connections between students and adults, let's say, or even to peers, needs development. Number 5, I already mentioned, want the opportunity to contribute to the world. So all these are working against learning and the motivation to learn. And to cap it off, we can go to the Stanford Center for Adolescence in California, where their center has been studying youth for the last 8 years or so, in focus groups and individuals and face-to-face interviews and a number of ways of getting at it. And what they found when they asked schools at the senior level, these are students who are just about to graduate from secondary school. They're on their way probably to post-secondary education. And when they asked them about purpose, the most that students could come up with was, I want to go to a good university, get a good job and have a good life. It was very superficial and not very much centered. And their conclusion was only about 24% of the students had this. So I feel very confident in pulling all this together to say, without question, that more than the majority, 55, 65, 70% of students in the existing system are not really connecting with learning. That's a powerful problem, but that's also a very attractive one. When it gets that serious, something has to be done about it. We started our something in 2015 with a book called The Coherence that I did with Joanne Quinn, who's the co-leader of Deep Learning with me. And we simplified it into these 4 quadrants. We call it simplicity. which means you take the smallest number of key components and you make them interrelate, and that they cover the problem, so to speak, and they provide a framework for interactive action. We don't go 1, 2, 3, 4 around the quadrants. They're all dynamic, but if you take the first two, getting the purpose of education right as the top left-hand quadrant, doing that through collaborative cultures, which I'll come to, really nailing it down with deep learning, which we'll also look at, and then securing accountability falls into place rather naturally if you do the first three. In other words, if you do the first three, you can prove that you are know what you're doing. You can prove you're getting results, and it makes the dealing with accountability. And we don't have time to fully go into accountability the way that I might in a longer workshop, but this is a good framework. But coherence, let's make sure we nail down and understand what coherence is. It's the shared depth of understanding about the nature of the work. So it's not alignment, which you can describe on paper or in words. It's the subjective experience of the individual saying, I understand what we're doing in this work. But more important than that is the understanding of the shared coherence. This is the culture, in other words, of a whole group of students and teachers in a school district with some of our districts have 150 or 200 schools in them, or whatever the number is. And that this is working towards this coherence gets us into the right development that's needed to move the system forward. If you think of that quadrant of coherence, top left was focus. Our focus now, different than before. Before maybe it was academic subjects, which are in our model, but they're not the initial drivers. That in the initial driver is this, the purpose and meaning of learning for our students and parents and others, for teachers for that matter. And to do this in a way that helps produce graduates who can not only cope with the world, but can contribute to the betterment of it. And that at the same time developing and addressing inequity. And so this is the nature of the work. It's new, and this we have to position it new. Some of the tools at our disposal are not new, so you bring them forward because they work in this context. So let's start with the action. I have a book called Nuance, so it's about leadership. You can go to that and see examples. There's at least 10 examples of successful cases. The subtitle of Nuance is successful leaders compared to those leaders who aren't so successful. Then from a distance, it looks like they're doing the same things. If you look at their vision statement, their mission statement, they look similar. But the leaders who are effective, the big difference is they participate in the action. They forge the unity of purpose. This is a crucial way of getting started. They're interactive. They don't just be cheerleaders. They don't just formulate plans and things like that. They roll up their sleeves. They work with others. They develop teams. They develop the action that gets results. They develop a legacy of a lot of leaders who can carry on after themselves, after they leave, for example, after 6, 7, or whatever the term is. So this is this more active, proactive leadership is crucial, focusing on, this case, purpose. But as you get into purpose, you want to get into solutions. And these solutions are a function of shaping and reshaping good ideas that are really known to work, and developing the capacity about it. That's the skill, individually and together, to work on them. The things that I will show you, think of capacity, and their ownership, the commitment to wanting to do this. So this gets us to the second quadrant of the coherence model, which is a powerful one. It's about collaboration, but it's a mixed track record. That is to say, collaboration in education has been talked about for at least 50 years, and it has a very superficial track record. It has really that you can collaborate to do nothing, collaborate to do the wrong things. It comes and goes. It's not very much of strength. It is the case, and I don't think that maybe this is a coincidence, but it's happening at the same time, is that when collaboration started to get more precise, more powerful, it was about 5 years ago. And so it starts to build better and better, and then it meets deep learning. And I'll tell you about the deep learning part. In 2018, especially, they made it connected. And so deep learning and collaboration are feeding on each other in a way that's never happened before. It means we have to be more precise about collaboration. And this takes us to the domain of what that precision looks like. There are three terms that are used, different terms. They're all similar concept about the group being more effective. So I'll give you the labels, and you'll see that they all overlap, and that's not a bad thing. So we have collective efficacy, we will have collaborative professionalism, and we will see connected autonomy. Those are all in the domain of purposeful, effective collaboration. So this one from John Hattie is really interesting because his initial work, for maybe 20 years, was on the invisible learning. I'm sure you will know his work that way. Invisible learning was the identification of teaching practices that had the most impact on students' learning, on their engagement, and on their accomplishments as a learner. And that's what that was. The trouble with it, it was only individualistic. So you could look at that list. His list now is something like 400. If you go to his website, you'll see the individual practices like involving parents, or meta learning with students, or feedback to students. They're all there, and they're all calculated in a research sense. So this was that initial list was quite good, but it was limited because it was it was an individual list here and there. When we started to work together with Hattie about 6-7 years ago, we started to talk about, well, you've got individual practices. What about group practices? That is, teachers working together. What does that look like? And we said that's bound to be stronger if you do use the right things, because now it's the group, power of the group. And he said, intuitively, I think you're right, but we haven't looked at that. So we're going to do that. And then they started to examine what he ended up calling collective efficacy. So I want to convey that to you, both its definition and its impact. So the definition on the screen, there are 4 elements of it. All 4 are needed. They feed on each other. So he said, when we find collective efficacy, the group in the school working together powerfully, he said, we find they've developed a shared belief about the capacity to work together to get results. Their primary evidence for that is impact on the students. That if you don't have impact on students as evidence, it's not really convincing. We have that evidence. Third, he said the culture of collaboration is to implement high yield strategies, not just the latest innovation, but innovations that work to get results. And that this is very important from a change point of view, that leaders who participate in frequent specific collaboration, leader as learner, very, very much part of the group, influencing the group, not dominating the group, but enabling the group, being a learner with the group. So that's a very good list. It's so consistent with our findings on change, but the results are even more impressive. You can't interpret this just by seeing the numbers, so I'll interpret it for you. I mentioned he calculates the effect size, which is a statistical measure to show the degree of impact of a given practice on student learning and engagement. And as he says in his own guidelines, that 0.40 or above is statistically significant, but not very powerful. And so you have to get up to 0.8, 1.0, whatever, which are hardly any of those measures, some of them, so that you see the range, the effect sizes I've listed there, less than 1 to less than a third. A whole bunch of them that are worthwhile, but they're so small in impact that they won't carry the day. When they calculated teacher efficacy, they came up with an astounding finding, 1.57, which blew the roof off the quality of it. The next ones down were there are probably 1 or 2 that were at 1.03 or something, and the vast majority below that. So I'm sorry to belabor this, but it's such an amazing finding in a research sense, that collective teacher efficacy, which you saw the 4 elements, well led, is having this big impact on learning. We have to worry about the measures of impact on learning. Certainly student engagement is one powerful measure, but also the measures on learning, which we're working on these days. So that's John's contribution, Hattie and his group, that we now see collaboration being specified, being really refined. And then second one, collaborative professionalism, or professional collaboration, is another sociologist, Amanda Datnow, and her team in California, where they studied high poverty schools and sorted out which ones had impact on student engagement and learning and which ones didn't, and what did the ones that had impact, what were their characteristics. So I'm summarizing her really good work in these 2 slides that you'll see. One is the professional part. The other is the emotional part. So professional learning that you see in these number of stances, I won't take every one, but there's some key ones here for me. Teachers didn't distinguish between formal and informal collaboration. In other words, it wasn't just meetings or workshops. It was the way they interacted day after day, which we can accurately call the culture, day after day, of the norms of learning. That was strong. There was supportive norms, but there was a lot of specific feedback. There was a critical assessment. They weren't just saying, oh, this is the latest thing, let's do it. They were evaluating it. Is it for us? They were getting into a continuous improvement. So down the list they go, they get stronger. It's a culture that can last. And that's what I would call the professional element of their finding. In addition to the professional element, they found what we could call the emotional side. And even before COVID, this was crucial, but it's doubly so now and many times over, is that teaching was always been a highly emotional occupation. And now with all kinds of external demands, all kinds of internal problems, that the way of sorting those, getting curriculum, getting organized for how the students should learn is massive. And in these schools that were successful, remember we're talking successful, is that they paid attention to each other's well-being. They helped each other out. They when people were in trouble, they found ways of dealing with that. They wanted the inspiration to be a force for change. They wanted, in other words, the professional and the emotional to go together in interaction to produce the best possible learning. So that's the second of three. The third of three is Andy Hargreaves, my colleague, really powerful work on collaboration. In this case, and he ends up calling it collaborative professionalism, is to where they looked at a lot of examples of successful collaboration in now groups of schools and do these conclusions. And I only take the first one because it's the main one for me, that the joint work of collaborative professionalism is, and this is the line that stands out, embedded in the culture and life of the school. It's in the culture. It's not in the meetings a couple of times a week. It's in the day-to-day interaction and the nature of what they value. And it's embedded and it stays strong as long as it's cultivated and has strong leadership. And then finally, we've added our own term to capture, we think, as aspects that are easily overlooked. We call it connected autonomy, which means that there's a degree of autonomy and you're not swallowed up by the group all the time. You can be your own person. But there's also, at the same time, I do mean simultaneously, that there's a connection that you need to make to contribute to the group and to learn from the group. And this is a coexisting concept where connected autonomy, you're always connected. You have a degree of autonomy and you learn from others. We think it's a stronger concept than collaboration because it's more powerful. It's people are attracted to it because sometimes because the autonomy part, but autonomy is not isolation. I want to underscore that. Autonomy is being your own person when you're in the group, being able to do things on your own, but mostly being able to do things with other people. And then this is a really important point for you at this conference, that a lot of the research, if you're not careful to distinguish it, might be talking about individual schools being collaborative. And that's a good thing, but it's only like a small part if we're only talking about intra-school collaboration, which is actually most of the research, not all of it, but most of it. And so we want to say at the same time that networks are crucial, that schools working together. Sometimes this is natural in a district or a municipality. Other times it's networks like in New Zealand where it's regional, but these are schools, 7 to 12 schools at a time, working together with designated leadership, so research support to do it. And they see their role as working outside the school, contribute locally to the network of schools, but also to the system, working on the system, and that ability to extend it and to expand what they're doing. So remember that collaboration we're talking about is a feature of the system, not just of individual schools. It's a feature of school clusters, but not just clusters. It's the feature of also the policy level work, as we're seeing in the recent developments at the system level, which have been stimulated by the fallout from COVID-19. And now there are more people working on the system level change, working so rapidly in some ways that we don't have all the evidence. We have the evidence of what they're working on, but not what the impact is. So look for in the next 2 years some examples from this research. Scotland, I'll just name one country, where they've taken their 32 districts, put them into 6 quadrants that they call alliances. The alliances geographically through the country are called collaborative improvement, regional improvement collaboratives. So RIC, regional improvement collaboratives. So we have the whole system working in interaction laterally and also vertically. And it's about this work that I'm talking about. And to summarize that, the reason that this works is because of intrinsic motivators. That Dan Pink a few years ago did a great book on motivation called Drive, D-R-I-V-E. And in Drive, he said there's extrinsic motivation when you do things because you're paid to do them or you're expected to do them and given external rewards. He said those can get a little bit of action now and then, but they never last. The people are not going to keep going when it is problematic if it's extrinsic to their own values. But if you get to intrinsic values where they really find the meaning, the purpose, the camaraderie, all of that, it's a powerful way to stick with the group and make it work. These are mostly his words. They map onto us, our work exactly. Sense of purpose is about the moral imperative that I talked about. Mastery is about the capacity, getting more skilled at it. Degree of autonomy, that's our connected autonomy and connectedness. So this is a very powerful core summary of what you should be trying to accomplish, whether your group is 6 teachers or 1 school or 22 schools or a lot of schools in the country. Then the next one is a good summary, I'm going to say, that Andy Hargreaves and I did in a book in 2012. It's pretty comprehensive. It's the foundation for a lot of things. We use the word capital in the kind of generic sense. Capital is a resource where if you invest in it, you get higher yield. So this is human capital is the quality of the group. And if you're interested, as you are, in improving the teaching profession, you want to have all 3 of these. And you want to have leaders working to develop and foster all 3. So getting better and better as individual teachers. Social capital, quality of the group, what I call collaboration, or especially the efficacy kind of collaboration. Decisional capital, what evidence do they use? What decisions are they using to mark progress? What are they doing about indicators and developments? So this is pretty good. I think it's consistent. It's cumulative. It's more specific than it was at any time. It's all recent in the last 5 years, and it feeds forward into the agenda. So this is promising. I mentioned the book Nuance. I really would like you to look at that. Look at the leaders that I feature. They're named, their real names, their real situations, their real strategies. And that's really, you get at the nuance means you're getting at the subtleties of what these leaders do. One common thing that they do is they get deeply inside the context in which they're working. We called it in that contextual literacy. Contextual literacy is when you come into and learn about and understand the context. And another way of saying that is every time you change your job, you become de-skilled to a certain extent. De-skilled in terms of your effectiveness as a leader. And the COVID, of course, changed everybody's job because it changed the whole context. So everybody is a learner as well as having to get better. So Nuance does do a lot of that. Again, underscoring what I mentioned about successful leaders and in your own work in Pakistan, you should be developing teachers in the teaching profession as leaders and working together in effectiveness and the regular leaders at the school level and system level. Policy level is another area which I think is quite messy right now and up in the air. The good thing is it's up in the air rather than on the ground in the wrong way. And so look for in the next year much more work on the policy changes that will be required for this system. In the means of stimulating that, I want to end with this work on deep learning we're doing, some specifics for you. It turns out to be very powerful because it addresses both the individual problem, which was boredom, and also the system problem, which is why are we doing this and what impact can it have? So it sort of comes together in an inspiring way. This is the purpose. I've already said it in an earlier slide, so I'll just give you the words again in slightly different order. But it's a new purpose for learning. It's a new purpose for students. They find it much more motivating when you speak to them, when you give them these opportunities. There's also a big change in pedagogy involved. This is all the things between the learning goals and the outcomes are pedagogy. How do you learn together? What do you learn? And there's a very radical difference in the new work in terms of the relationship between students and teachers, between teachers and teachers for that matter, between teachers and families. We built it into our checklist on the right side. This is what we foster. I'll show you our framework in a moment. The previous teacher-driven, just give me the facts knowledge, which never worked, or at least didn't work in recent decades, is now replaced by this more sophisticated, powerful learning mechanism. And you can use this as a checklist or as a guidance for that. You can also use the substance of our model, which I'm going to give you now. The model, starting with I guess I'll say the desired outcomes. The desired outcomes are the global competencies, the 6 of them. We have them, there's 3 or 4 dimensions of each one. They're described, they're measured actually. We have rubrics and protocols to measure and assess them, to guide implementation, but also to pull out what are people learning. Then we build in pedagogy, big 4 elements that are synergized. They have to do with the pedagogy that you saw in the last slide about participation of teachers and students. Then you have to do extended partnerships on learning, going deeper with the community now. You have learning environments instead of just the classroom. You have the bigger, the world for that matter, of knowledge. And then you have technology, which we've repositioned to say, this is the technology is about learning is to leverage technology. Technology is never the driver. It can stimulate things, but it's pedagogy that's the accelerator, the deep learning, and the 4 elements of it. The full model, it can be simply expressed. It's very complex to do it in practice, as we've seen in ours, but we're working with larger and larger chunks of the system. I've described this model, except 2 things I want to emphasize. One is, you know, that you can see the foundation. Recently, we've added purpose. It was always there, but we made it more explicit. It is a foundation. The purpose for learning is what I've talked about in terms of the complexity of the world, of coping with it and helping to change it. And all of these things are working in that direction. The other thing to comment on is the 3rd ring, which are the conditions. Let's call it the infrastructure. It's the conditions at the school level, the culture of the school. It's conditions at the municipality or district level, and it's the conditions at the policy level. We are finding in our work there's a very strong uptake at the school level, actually quite a strong uptake at the district or municipality level when you get started with it. But at the system level, it's more complicated. It's more political. It's more complex. It's about policies and practices. The good news, it's led by OECD for that matter now, is that the policies are being re-examined. Do we have the right policies for assessing outcomes? No, we don't. Are we investing in the right strategies to implement things and to get a system change? Are we getting a sense that people at the local level have a commitment to improve the overall system? And do we find that the people at the central and middle level are acting as partners downward, as we put it, in that? And the answer would be no historically, but these are now taking hold and they improve the whole possibility of change. And then why deep learning is transforming practice. Here's the list of 6 things that we see, each of these that I could spend 5 minutes on each one, which I won't do, but take number 3 and 4, ways to measure growth and competencies. We are doing that with our own, but we're also partnering with other people. Sandra Milligan, who's a professor of assessment at the Center for Assessment at Melbourne University in Australia, has a major project on new metrics, in other words, new measures of outcomes. And she sees learning from us on deep learning as necessary. We see learning from her on measurement as necessary. So new developments are going to happen rapidly in the next couple of years. And speaking of rapidity, number 4, we are seeing now that after slow change, most of this last 60 years, we're now seeing faster change. Change is the speed of change is not under certain circumstances it takes off, under others it takes forever. So we think that the levers that we're putting together are causing it to happen rapidly, and that's why we want to think now of this current decade we're in as the moonshot decade. That is the chance to make a big difference in a short period of time, and that opportunity has not been there in our lifetimes. It won't be there many times more in our lifetimes, but it will, or in this century for that matter. But it is here now, and that's what we need to work on. And then the equity part is a very explicit built into our strategy. We think our strategy has a much greater sense of because those students who are disconnected are deep learning helps all students. It especially helps students who are disconnected because they find a place of learning here that has meaning for them, and they're motivated to get started. And once they get started, they get excited to learn more. So this is even though a lot of money has been put into equity in the last 50 years, it's never made a difference, except the odd case. Never made a system difference. Now there's a chance to make this as a normal part of the agenda. So our theme is engage the world, change the world, which came from students. Really, when we started to change things and they got very motivated, they did become engaged in world issues, whether it was local issues or beyond that. They did, and we wanted to insist on this through our model, that if you want to change something, you better understand it, so you need learning. So make sure that learning and change go together, and that your role now, once you get going, it is literally to learn more and more about the world, what's problematic about it, and what's good about it, what's potentially great about it, and how do you engage with that as a learner, both while you're at school and afterwards, and become a change agent for the future. This is about engage the world, change the world. So have a great conference and get going on this agenda.